I stood frozen in the middle of the airport terminal, my entire world collapsing around me in slow motion. Through the crowd of travelers, I could see them clearly at Gate 47, just 50 feet away. My parents and Emma, all three of them laughing and taking selfies wearing Hawaiian leis around their necks and carrying designer shopping bags. My mother was showing off what looked like an expensive new watch to my sister. My father had a tropical shirt on that still had the tags attached. Emma was wearing a dress I recognized from a boutique window downtown, the one with the $1,500 price tag. They were supposed to be in mourning. They were supposed to be devastated. 3 weeks ago, they had called me sobbing, telling me that Grandma had died suddenly. 3 weeks ago, I had wired them $12,000 for funeral expenses and emergency flights. 3 weeks ago, I had emptied my savings account, maxed out my credit cards, and eaten nothing but rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner so they could lay my grandmother to rest with dignity. But there was no funeral. There was no grief. There was just a family vacation to Hawaii paid for with my money, while I had been working 16-hour days trying to recover from the financial devastation. And the worst part, the part that made my knees buckle and my vision blur, was that they were having the time of their lives. Emma spotted me first. Her face went pale, then flushed red. She grabbed my mother's arm and pointed in my direction. I watched my mother's expression shift from shock to something that looked almost like annoyance, as if I had somehow ruined their fun by simply existing in the same airport. My father didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just stared at me with cold, calculating eyes, probably already formulating whatever lie he was going to tell. I had come to this airport to pick up my boss, who was flying in from a business conference. I had volunteered for the task because it meant overtime pay, and I desperately needed every extra dollar after giving them everything I had. I never imagined I would find my entire family returning from a luxury vacation funded by a fake funeral. I never imagined I would discover in the most brutal way possible that my grandmother was still alive, and that I had been played for a fool. Emma started walking toward me, her expensive heels clicking on the terminal floor, that same entitled smirk on her face that I had seen my entire life. And in that moment, standing there in my 3-year-old discount store clothes while she paraded in designer everything bought with my sacrifice, something inside me shattered. Not my heart. That had been broken for years. What shattered was the illusion that these people were capable of loving me. What shattered was every excuse I had ever made for them. What shattered was the prison of obligation and guilt that had kept me trapped my entire life. If you're listening to this story and you've ever felt like you were giving everything while getting nothing in return, please hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to me, and I promise this story gets better. Drop a comment below if you've ever been in a situation like this, because you're not alone. Now let me take you back to where this all began. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts, I was always the invisible child. My sister Emma was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, she became the sun around which our family orbited. The nurses in the hospital commented on how beautiful she was with her bright blue eyes and golden hair. I remember standing beside my mother's hospital bed, my 5-year-old hand gripping the rail, trying to see this new sister everyone was cooing over. My mother barely glanced at me the entire visit. When I tried to climb up to see Emma better, my father physically pulled me back and told me to stop being so rough. I hadn't even touched her yet. The signs were there from the beginning, but I was too young to understand what they meant. When I was 7, I brought home a spelling test with a perfect score. I had studied for hours, writing each word 10 times to memorize them. I ran into the kitchen waving the paper, desperate to show my parents. My mother was on the phone planning Emma's 4th birthday party, a princess-themed extravaganza that would cost over $3,000. She glanced at my test, said, "That's nice, dear," and returned to her call without missing a beat. I taped the test to the refrigerator myself. It stayed there for 2 days before my father took it down to make room for Emma's latest finger painting, which wasn't even recognizable as anything but remained displayed for 3 months. When I was 10 years old, I asked my parents if I could take piano lessons like Emma. She had started lessons 6 months earlier and already had a beautiful white baby grand piano in her room, positioned perfectly by the window where afternoon light streamed in. I had been teaching myself to read music from library books, practicing on the piano when Emma wasn't home, my fingers stumbling over scales and simple melodies. My mother looked at me with this expression I would come to know so well over the years, a mixture of pity and dismissal, her lips pursing slightly, as if my request was somehow distasteful. She said we couldn't afford 2 sets of lessons, that Emma had natural talent, and I should focus on my schoolwork instead. My grades were perfect. I had never gotten anything below an A. But that didn't matter because Emma needed piano lessons, and there was only room for one talented daughter in our family. I remember nodding and going to my room, swallowing the disappointment like bitter medicine, my throat tight with unshed tears. I taught myself not to cry in front of them because tears made my mother uncomfortable and my father angry. That night, I heard them laughing in the living room about how they had just booked a week-long cruise for our family vacation to the Caribbean. Emma squealed with delight so loudly I could hear it through my bedroom wall. I wasn't even told about the trip until 2 days before we left. My mother handed me a bathing suit she had bought for Emma that was too small and told me to make it work because they had already spent the vacation budget. The suit didn't fit. I spent the entire cruise wearing shorts and a t-shirt while Emma modeled 5 different designer swimsuits my parents had custom ordered for her. The vacation itself was a masterclass in favoritism. Every activity was chosen based on what Emma wanted to do. She wanted to swim with dolphins, so we swam with dolphins even though I was terrified of open water. She wanted to go parasailing, so we went parasailing even though heights made me physically ill. I threw up in a bathroom on the boat, and my father told me I was being dramatic and ruining the family vacation. When I asked if we could visit the historical sites I had read about, my mother said we didn't have time and that I should stop being so boring. Emma had made friends with other kids on the ship and spent her evenings at the youth club while I sat alone in our cabin reading books I had brought from home. My parents went to shows and fancy dinners, leaving me behind because the youth club had an age cutoff and I was too old. At 13, I spent my evenings watching television in an empty cabin, listening to the sounds of laughter and music from the decks above, wondering what was wrong with me that my own family didn't want me around. High school was when the pattern really solidified and became undeniable. Emma wanted to join the cheerleading squad, so my parents bought her a complete wardrobe of designer clothes, not just the uniforms, but casual outfits to wear to practice in competitions. They paid for private tumbling lessons 3 times a week at $60 per session. They bought her custom-made pom-poms and a personalized cheer bag and drove her to competitions every weekend, sometimes traveling to other states. The total cost over her 4 years of cheerleading was over $15,000. Meanwhile, I had made the honor roll every semester since 6th grade. I was part of the debate team, the math club, and volunteered at a local library every weekend. When I asked if I could go on the school trip to Washington, D.C. for the debate club nationals, my father said we couldn't afford it. The trip cost $300. I had raised half the money myself through babysitting and odd jobs, asking them only to cover the remaining $150. My father looked me in the eye and told me that family money needed to go toward important things, not frivolous trips. 2 weeks later, they bought Emma a new laptop because she wanted to start a fashion blog. I started working at a local diner when I turned 16, coming home smelling like grease and coffee, my feet aching from 8-hour shifts. I worked every Friday and Saturday night, missing parties and school events, saving every penny for college. My paychecks went into a shoebox under my bed because my parents insisted I was too young for a bank account. Emma got a weekly allowance of $50 just for existing money she spent on makeup and clothes and concert tickets. She never worked a single day. When I asked why she got an allowance and I didn't, my mother said it was because Emma was still learning to manage money and I already had a job. The logic was circular and nonsensical, but questioning it only led to lectures about being ungrateful and causing problems. The summer before my senior year changed everything, or so I thought. I received a full scholarship to State University, a merit-based award that covered tuition, room, and board. The letter came in a thick envelope, and when I opened it and saw the word, "Congratulations," I actually screamed. For the first time in my life, I had accomplished something undeniable, something they couldn't minimize or ignore. I was so proud, so excited to finally have something that was mine, something that proved I had value. I burst into the kitchen waving the acceptance letter, my heart soaring, my face flushed with joy. My mother glanced up from her magazine, barely focusing on the paper in my hand. She said, "That's nice, dear. "Emma, come look at these prom dresses I found for you." Emma was only a freshman, prom was 3 years away, but my mother spent the next 2 hours showing Emma dress after dress on her iPad, discussing colors and styles, and whether they should hire a professional makeup artist for the big day. My scholarship letter sat forgotten on the counter, eventually getting coffee-stained and crumpled before I rescued it and put it in my room. My father came home that evening, and I tried again showing him the letter with trembling hands. He read it, nodded, and said, "Good. At least we won't have to pay for your college." Then he turned to Emma and asked about her day. That was it, the biggest achievement of my life, and I got 6 words. I moved into my dorm that fall with a borrowed comforter, secondhand textbooks I had found at used bookstores, and a desk lamp from Goodwill. My roommate Jessica had arrived with her parents in a packed SUV, carrying boxes of new bedding, a mini fridge, a microwave, decorations, and enough clothes to fill our entire closet. Her parents spent 3 hours helping her set up her side of the room, hanging pictures and making her bed and organizing her desk supplies. They took us both out to dinner at a nice Italian restaurant and insisted on paying. When they finally left, Jessica's mother hugged her for a full minute, crying and telling her how proud she was. I watched this display of affection with a strange mixture of confusion and longing. Was this normal? Did other parents actually care this much? My parents had driven me to campus in our aging minivan. They helped me carry my 3 boxes up to my 3rd-floor dorm room, my father complaining about the stairs the entire time. The whole process took 20 minutes. They didn't help me unpack or make my bed. My mother looked around at the small room and said, "Well, this is adequate." My father checked his watch and said they needed to get going because they had promised to take Emma to the mall. They had driven 2 hours to drop me off and were staying for less than 30 minutes. My mother gave me a brief, stiff hug. My father shook my hand. Then they left. I stood at the window and watched their van pull away, and I realized they hadn't even asked for my dorm phone number or my class schedule or anything about my life. They didn't care. I cried for the first time in years that night. Jessica heard me and came over to my bed, sitting beside me in the dark. I told her everything, the whole story of my childhood, pouring out in gasping sobs. She held my hand and listened. When I finished, she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "You know that's not normal, right? You know that's abuse." The word hit me like ice water. Abuse. I had never thought of it that way. There were no bruises, no violence, no screaming matches. But there was neglect. There was favoritism so extreme it bordered on cruelty. There was emotional abandonment. Jessica became my first real friend, and she helped me see that my family wasn't just flawed, they were toxic. College was supposed to be my escape, but somehow my family found ways to keep me tethered. I threw myself into my classes, determined to prove I was worth something. I majored in marketing with a minor in psychology, maintained a near-perfect GPA, and joined 3 different student organizations. I worked 2 jobs, one at the campus bookstore and another as a tutor for struggling freshmen. My days started at 6 in the morning and ended past midnight. I had no social life, no dating life, no college experience like the one I saw other students having, but I was building something. I was creating value. I was becoming someone. My sophomore year, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, my father called me crying. I had never heard my father cry before. His voice was broken, desperate, almost unrecognizable. He said they were going to lose the house, that he had made some bad investments, and they needed $15,000 immediately or they would be homeless. He said Emma would have to drop out of school. He said they would be living on the streets. He said they had no one else to turn to. He begged. My father actually begged me for money. I had been working 2 jobs while maintaining my full course load for almost 2 years. I had saved nearly $20,000 for my future money I had earned with my own hands, my own time, my own sacrifice. The money sat in a savings account I had finally opened when I turned 18, and I checked the balance almost daily, watching the number grow, feeling proud of what I had accomplished. That money represented freedom. It represented my future. It represented proof that I could take care of myself. I gave them $15,000 without hesitation. I wired the money that same day, my hands shaking as I filled out the forms at the bank. The teller asked if I was sure, noting it was a large sum for a college student. I told her it was an emergency. She processed the transfer, and I walked out of that bank feeling hollow and noble at the same time. I was saving my family. I was being the good daughter. Surely this would finally make them love me. 2 months later, I came home for winter break and found out they had remodeled the entire kitchen. Granite countertops, new appliances, custom cabinets, the works. The kitchen looked like something from a home improvement magazine, all gleaming surfaces and modern fixtures. I stood in the doorway staring at it, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. When I asked about the house being in danger, my father looked confused for a moment before saying, "Oh, we worked that out, don't worry about it." His tone was dismissive, casual, like I was asking about something trivial. I felt my stomach drop. I asked how much the kitchen remodel cost. My mother said $18,000, then immediately started showing me all the features and upgrades. I asked where they got the money if they were about to lose the house. My father's face darkened, and he said that was none of my business, that they were the parents and didn't need to explain their financial decisions to me. When I pressed harder, asking directly if they had lied about the emergency, my mother actually laughed. She said I was being paranoid and ungrateful. She said they had taken out a home equity line of credit to fix the house up before selling it, that my money had gone to other bills. She couldn't specify which bills. She got angry when I kept asking questions. I left that conversation feeling like I was going insane. Had I misunderstood? Had they really been in danger of losing the house? Or had they lied to me? I wanted to believe them because the alternative was too painful. I had given them $15,000 of my hard-earned money based on a lie. I had sacrificed my security, my future, to fund a kitchen renovation. But I pushed those thoughts down because acknowledging the truth meant acknowledging that my parents were capable of deliberate cruelty. So I convinced myself I had misunderstood. I convinced myself they were telling the truth. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Emma's high school graduation came during my junior year of college. I drove home for the ceremony, exhausted from final exams and working double shifts to rebuild my savings. The ceremony was held in the school's auditorium, packed with families celebrating their graduates. When they called Emma's name, she walked across the stage in a designer dress our mother had spent $800 on. My entire family stood up and screamed her name, holding up signs and taking hundreds of photos. I remember my own graduation 3 years earlier. My parents had stayed seated, barely clapping. They hadn't taken a single photo. They had left immediately after the ceremony because they had dinner reservations. Watching them celebrate Emma with such enthusiasm felt like a knife twisting in my chest. At the graduation party my parents threw for Emma afterward, a catered event in our backyard that cost over $5,000, relatives kept asking me about school and my plans after graduation. Every time I started to answer, my mother would interrupt and redirect the conversation back to Emma. Aunt Linda asked about my scholarship and whether I was enjoying State University. I had barely said 2 sentences when my mother cut in with, "Did you know Emma got accepted to 5 different art schools? 5? We're so proud of her." Aunt Linda tried to continue our conversation, but my mother physically positioned herself between us, effectively ending my participation. This happened over and over throughout the party. I existed only to make Emma look good by comparison. After graduation, Emma announced she had chosen to attend the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the most expensive art schools in the country. The tuition was $63,000 per year, not including housing supplies or living expenses. My parents had taken out loans but couldn't cover everything. My mother called me 3 weeks after I had graduated college and started my new job in Chicago. She asked if I could help with Emma's tuition, just for this semester, just until they figured things out. I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to say no, but the guilt was overwhelming. The voice in my head that had been trained since childhood whispered that I was selfish, that family helps family, that if I truly loved them, I would sacrifice. What would people think if I let my sister drop out of college when I had the means to help? What kind of person would that make me? So I said yes. I started sending them $1,000 every month. My new job as a marketing coordinator paid $48,000 a year, which seemed like an enormous amount after years of scraping by. But after taxes, rent, utilities, student loans for my own education, food and transportation, there wasn't much left. The $1,000 a month meant I was living paycheck to paycheck again. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself once Emma graduated, I could focus on my own life. I just had to make it 4 years. But $1,000 quickly became $1,500, then $2,000, then sometimes $3,000 when there were emergencies. Every month brought a new crisis. Emma needed a new laptop because hers broke. Emma needed money for a school trip to New York to visit museums. Emma needed supplies for a major project. Emma needed winter clothes because Chicago got so cold and she hadn't brought enough from home. Emma needed money for spring break because all her friends were going to Cancun and she couldn't be the only one who stayed behind. Emma needed money for a summer internship in Paris that was unpaid but crucial for her career. The requests came through my mother, always framed as desperate needs rather than wants. My mother would call me at work, her voice tight with stress, explaining that Emma was struggling and needed help. She would say things like, "I know you don't want your sister to suffer," and "We're family, we help each other," and "You're so successful you can afford to help." The implication was always that I was selfish if I hesitated, cruel if I questioned, heartless if I said no. So I never said no. I ate ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. I walked 45 minutes to work every day to save on gas money and the expense of parking downtown. I wore the same 3 work outfits in rotation, washing them by hand in my bathroom sink because I couldn't afford the laundromat. My apartment was a tiny studio in a rough neighborhood, the cheapest place I could find. The heating barely worked in winter. The air conditioning was non-existent in summer. There were water stains on the ceiling and holes in the walls that I covered with posters from the dollar store. My mattress was on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame. I owned 3 plates, 2 bowls, and a handful of silverware from Goodwill. I had no television, no couch, no furniture except the mattress and a plastic lawn chair I used at my desk. Meanwhile, Emma's Instagram was a constant showcase of luxury. Photos from her study abroad program in Paris, dining at expensive restaurants, visiting museums, posing in front of the Eiffel Tower. Pictures of her dorm room that looked like a West Elm catalog with expensive bedding and decorations and a massive wardrobe. Selfies showing off designer clothes and bags and shoes. Posts about weekend trips to other European countries. Every image was another reminder that my sacrifice was funding someone else's dream life while I lived in poverty. I unfollowed her eventually, unable to bear watching my money be spent on luxuries I would never have. But my mother would still call and tell me about Emma's adventures, her tone bright with pride. She never asked how I was doing. She never asked if I was struggling. She never acknowledged that I was the reason Emma could have these experiences. I was just the ATM that never ran out of money. 3 years into this cycle, I met David. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and I had stopped at a coffee shop on my way to work, a rare indulgence I allowed myself once a week. The barista was a guy about my age, with dark hair and warm brown eyes. He was clearly artistic, with paint stains on his fingers and a sketchbook beside the register. When he handed me my coffee, I noticed he had drawn a little cartoon on my cup. It was a stick figure version of me, exaggerated, tired eyes, and all holding a coffee cup with a speech bubble that said, "I need this." I laughed for the first time in months. The next week, there was another cartoon. This time, the stick figure me was surrounded by little hearts and stars with a speech bubble saying, "You've got this." I started looking forward to Tuesdays, to those small moments of acknowledgement that I existed and maybe mattered to someone. After a month of cartoon cups, David asked me out. His approach was endearingly nervous, stumbling over his words as he asked if I might want to get dinner sometime. Not at this coffee shop, obviously, because that would be weird, but maybe somewhere else if I wanted to. No pressure. I said yes before he finished his rambling invitation. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant, nothing fancy but more expensive than I could usually afford. I almost canceled 3 times because I knew my budget couldn't handle it. David picked up the check without hesitation and refused to let me split it. We talked for 4 hours, the conversation flowing easily. He told me about his work as a freelance graphic designer, his love of art and coffee and science fiction novels. I told him about my job, my career goals, my dreams of traveling someday. I didn't tell him about my family. Not yet. David was the first person who ever made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth more than what I could provide. He was attentive in ways I didn't know were possible. He remembered things I said in passing and brought them up later. He asked about my day and actually listened to my answers. He noticed when I was tired or stressed and would show up at my apartment with takeout refusing to let me pay. He made me laugh with stupid jokes and funny drawings. He saw me, truly saw me, in a way my own family never had. We had been dating for 6 months when I finally told him about my family situation. We were at his apartment, a much nicer place than mine, with actual furniture and decorations and art on the walls, eating Thai food and watching a movie. My phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail, but she called back immediately. Then again. On the 4th call, David paused the movie and asked if I needed to answer. I said no, but my anxiety was written all over my face. 20 minutes later, she had called 11 times. David asked if everything was okay. I said it was fine, just family stuff. He asked if family stuff usually involved 11 phone calls in 20 minutes. I started to cry, embarrassed and frustrated and exhausted. He turned off the movie and sat beside me waiting patiently. And then, everything poured out. The years of neglect, the favoritism, the financial exploitation, the constant guilt, all of it. David listened without interrupting, his face growing more and more horrified as I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked me how much money I had sent my family since starting my job. I had never added it up. I couldn't bear to know the exact number because knowing would make it real. But David insisted. We spent the next hour going through my bank records, creating a spreadsheet of every transfer to my parents. The final number was devastating. In 3 years, I had sent my family $81,600. $81,000. I could have bought a condo. I could have invested in my future. I could have traveled the world. Instead, I had funded my sister's luxury education and lifestyle while living in squalor. David held me while I cried, but even in his comfort, I could see the look on his face. It wasn't pity. It was concern. He was looking at me like I was a victim who couldn't see her own abuse. He asked me what I was getting in return. What did my family do for me? When was the last time they had helped me or even asked how I was doing? I couldn't answer. He asked if I had ever told them I was struggling financially because of these payments. I said no, they never asked, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. He asked me, point blank, did I think this was normal? Did I think this was what family was supposed to look like? That question broke something open in me. No, I didn't think it was normal. I knew it wasn't. But acknowledging that meant acknowledging that my family didn't love me the way they should. It meant accepting that I had spent my entire life chasing affection that was never going to come. It meant admitting that I was being used. The truth was too painful, so I had been living in denial, convincing myself that my sacrifice was noble rather than tragic. David didn't push me to cut them off. He didn't issue ultimatums or demands. He simply said that he loved me and he hated watching me destroy myself for people who didn't appreciate me. He said I deserved better. I told him he didn't understand, that it was complicated, that they needed me. He asked me again what I needed. I still didn't have an answer. We had our first serious fight about it 2 months later. I had just sent my family $3,000 because Emma wanted to go to some art festival in Venice, and my parents said they couldn't afford it without my help. David found out when he saw my bank statement on my desk while looking for a pen. He didn't yell, but his disappointment was worse than anger. He asked me why I kept doing this to myself. He asked me when I was going to realize they were never going to change. He asked me if I planned to fund Emma's entire life. I got defensive, saying he didn't understand family obligation. He said what I was describing wasn't obligation, it was exploitation. The fight lasted 3 hours. David laid out everything he had observed in our relationship. How I flinched every time my phone rang. How I had panic attacks when I checked my bank account. How I never bought myself anything, not even necessities. How I was constantly exhausted and stressed and anxious. How I apologized for everything, even things that weren't my fault. How I had nightmares about being homeless. He said watching me live like this was breaking his heart. He said he couldn't keep being silent while I slowly destroyed yourself. I told him it wasn't his place to judge my family or my choices. He said he wasn't judging, he was concerned. I accused him of not understanding family loyalty. He said loyalty was supposed to go both ways. I said I had an obligation to help. He asked me where that obligation came from because it clearly wasn't reciprocal. I told him he needed to mind his own business. He said I was his business because he loved me and he wasn't going to watch me drown without saying something. We didn't speak for 3 days after that fight. Those 3 days were some of the loneliest of my life. David had become my anchor, my safe place, and his absence made me realize how much I depended on him. But more than that, his words kept echoing in my head. When was the last time my family had helped me? When was the last time they had even asked how I was? When was the last time they had shown any interest in my life beyond what I could provide financially? I started keeping a journal during those 3 days, writing down every interaction I could remember with my family over the past year. The exercise was illuminating and devastating. Every single phone call had been a request for money. Every single conversation had centered on Emma's needs or my parents' problems. Not once had they asked about my life, my job, my relationship with David, my dreams, my struggles. Not once had they said they were proud of me. Not once had they said thank you for all the money I had sent. Not once had they acknowledged my sacrifice. The journal entries painted a picture I couldn't deny. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a resource to be mined. I was useful only insofar as I could provide financial support. Without money, I had no value to them. The realization was gutting, but it was also clarifying. I had been clinging to the hope that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, proved myself enough, they would finally love me the way they loved Emma. But that was never going to happen. The game was rigged from the start. I called David and apologized. He came over immediately and held me while I ugly cried for an hour. He didn't say I told you so. He didn't gloat about being right. He just held me and told me he was there for me whatever I decided to do. That unconditional support was more than my family had ever given me, and it showed me what love was supposed to look like. But knowing something intellectually and acting on it emotionally are two different things. I couldn't just flip a switch and stop caring. I couldn't just cut them off without warning. They were still my family, and despite everything, I still loved them. Or maybe I loved the idea of them, the version of them I wished existed. So I decided to try one more time to establish boundaries and create a healthier dynamic. I wrote a carefully worded email to my parents explaining that I needed to reduce my financial support. I didn't cut them off entirely. I didn't accuse them of anything. I simply said that I was struggling with my own bills and needed to focus on my financial stability. I said I could continue to help with genuine emergencies, but I couldn't fund Emma's discretionary expenses anymore. I told them I loved them and I hoped they understood. I asked if we could have a conversation about expectations going forward. My mother's response came within an hour. It was not the understanding, supportive message I had desperately hoped for. She said she was disappointed in me. She said family was supposed to help each other and I was abandoning them in their time of need. She said Emma was counting on me and I was letting her down. She said they had sacrificed so much to raise me and this was how I repaid them. She said if I truly loved my family, I would continue to help. The guilt was laid on thick, every sentence designed to make me feel like a terrible person for daring to prioritize my own well-being. My father's email came next, and it was somehow worse. He said he had thought I was better than this. He said he was ashamed of my selfishness. He said when he was my age, he would have done anything to help his family. He said real family doesn't abandon each other over money. He said I clearly cared more about my comfortable life than about the people who raised me. The irony of a man who had never sacrificed anything for me lecturing me about family obligation was not lost on me, but the words still hurt. Emma sent me a series of text messages that escalated from guilt to anger to outright abuse. She said I was ruining her education. She said I was jealous of her success. She said I had always been bitter and resentful. She said I was a terrible sister. She said I should be grateful they even still talked to me. She said if I didn't continue sending money, she would make sure the whole family knew what a selfish person I was. The threats were almost laughable, except they worked. I was terrified of being the villain in their story, the ungrateful daughter who turned her back on her family. The emotional manipulation worked. Within 2 days, I caved and sent them another $2,000 more than my usual monthly payment, as if to prove I wasn't selfish, as if to buy back their approval. My mother called to thank me, but managed to make it sound like I had simply fulfilled an obligation rather than made a choice. The relief I felt at her acceptance was pathetic, but it was real. I had been trained my entire life to equate their approval with my worth, and breaking that conditioning was harder than I ever imagined. David was furious when he found out I had sent more money. Not at me, but at the situation. He said I had fallen right back into their trap. He said they had played me perfectly, using guilt and obligation to manipulate me. He said nothing would ever change if I kept rewarding their bad behavior. He was right, but I couldn't seem to help myself. The fear of losing them completely was greater than my anger at how they treated me. At least this way, I still had a family, even if that family only valued me as an ATM. Things continued at this painful pattern for several more months. I would try to set a boundary. They would push back with guilt and manipulation. I would cave and send money. I would feel terrible about myself. David would try to support me while clearly struggling with watching me repeat this cycle. I felt stuck between two worlds, unable to fully commit to either. I couldn't cut off my family because I couldn't bear the guilt, but I couldn't fully invest in my own life because I was financially and emotionally drained. The breaking point came in November, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I had been with David for almost 2 years at that point. We had talked about moving in together, about building a future together. I had started to believe that maybe I could have a life beyond my family's demands. Maybe I could be happy. Maybe I deserved good things. Then my mother called with the news that shattered everything. She was crying, her voice breaking with grief that sounded absolutely genuine. She said my grandmother had died suddenly of a heart attack. My grandmother, my sweet grandma, who used to sneak me cookies when my parents weren't looking, who remembered my birthday every year, even when my own parents forgot, who had always treated me with kindness, even when no one else did. The news hit me like a physical blow. I loved my grandmother more than anyone else in my family. She was the only one who had ever made me feel valued. My mother said they needed money for the funeral and flights to Florida immediately. She said it was going to cost $15,000 total, maybe more. She said they had no savings for something like this. She said Grandma would have wanted a proper funeral. She said I was the only one who could help. Through my grief and shock, I heard myself agreeing. Of course I would help. Of course I would honor my grandmother's memory. Of course I would make sure she had a proper funeral. I had been saving money for months, carefully building up a fund that I was planning to use for an engagement ring for David. He had no idea, but I had been planning to propose to him on New Year's Eve. I had saved $1,200, nearly enough for the simple but meaningful ring I had found at a local jeweler. It was going to be perfect, a symbol of choosing my own happiness for once. But my grandmother was dead and my family needed help, and I couldn't be selfish at a time like this. I maxed out my credit card for the flights, a $3,000 charge that would take me months to pay off. I emptied my savings account for the funeral costs, transferring every penny I had managed to save. I gave them the money I had set aside for the engagement ring. I gave them everything. When my accounts were empty, I felt hollow but also oddly proud. I was a good granddaughter. I was honoring someone I loved. I was doing the right thing, even though it hurt. I called my grandmother's house to see how the family was holding up, thinking maybe I could offer emotional support, even though I couldn't afford to fly down for the funeral myself. My grandmother answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful, very much alive. For a moment, I thought I had somehow misdialed. But no, the caller ID confirmed I had reached her house. I asked if she was okay. She said she was wonderful, had just finished her morning garden work and was about to make lunch. She asked why I was asking. I felt reality tilting sideways. I asked her if anyone in the family was sick. She said no, everyone was healthy as far as she knew. I asked if there had been any emergencies. She said no, what was going on? I was worrying her. I told her that Mom had said she died. There was a long silence. Then my grandmother said very carefully that she didn't know why my mother would say that, but she was definitely alive and hadn't had any health scares recently. Her confusion sounded genuine. My parents had used her death as a manipulation tactic without even telling her. I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence for several minutes. They had lied about my grandmother's death. They had exploited my grief, my love for the one family member who had ever been kind to me, to steal more money from me. They had manufactured an elaborate story, complete with crying and funeral planning, all to get me to drain my accounts. And I had fallen for it completely. I called my parents immediately, my hands shaking with rage. My mother answered, her voice light and carefree. I could hear ocean waves in the background and seagulls crying. They were at the beach somewhere, probably on vacation. I asked her about grandmother's funeral. There was a long pause. Then my mother sighed, and in that sigh was years of entitlement and dismissal and a complete lack of remorse. She said, "Emma told you, didn't she? That girl can't keep a secret to save her life. Look, we were going to pay you back eventually. We just really needed a vacation, and we knew you wouldn't agree to pay for it if we asked directly. You take everything so seriously. Besides, it's not like you have kids or anything. You can afford it." She said it like I was the problem, like I was being unreasonable for expecting basic honesty from my own parents, like lying about someone's death was a minor inconvenience I was overreacting to. Something inside me broke, not in a sad way, but in a liberating way. Like a rope that had been strangling me finally snapped and I could suddenly breathe. I asked her how much of the money I had sent over the years had actually gone to emergencies. She got defensive, her tone shifting to irritation. She said they had used it for important things, that I was being ungrateful, that I should be happy I could help my family. I asked her to name one actual emergency I had helped with. She couldn't, or wouldn't. Instead, she said that I made good money and didn't have kids, so I could afford to help out. She said that's what family does. She said I was being selfish for questioning them. I asked her point blank if she understood what she had done. If she understood that she had lied about my grandmother's death to steal money from me. She actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound. She said steal was a harsh word, that it was just borrowing within the family. I asked when they planned to pay me back. She said when they could. She didn't know why was I making such a big deal about this. I asked her if she had any idea how much money I had sent them over the years. She said she didn't keep track. I told her the number $94,000. There was silence on the other end. Then my mother said, "That seems high. You must be exaggerating." I told her it wasn't that I had records of every transfer. She said, "Well, if you kept records, then clearly you were keeping score, which means you weren't giving from the heart. Real generosity doesn't come with strings attached." The mental gymnastics were astounding. She had turned my documentation of their exploitation into evidence of my selfishness. I told her I was done. I wasn't sending any more money. I wasn't attending family events. I wasn't going to be their ATM anymore. My mother's tone turned icy. She said I was making a huge mistake. She said I would regret this. She said I was burning bridges I could never rebuild. She said they had given me life and raised me, and this was how I repaid them. She said if I walked away now, I was walking away forever because they wouldn't take me back after this betrayal. She made it sound like I was the one betraying them, not the other way around. I hung up. My hands were steady now, my mind crystal clear for the first time in years. I called my bank and set up a new account, one my parents didn't have any information about. I changed my direct deposit. I called David and asked him to come over. When he arrived and saw the look on my face, he knew something fundamental had shifted. I told him everything, and then I told him what I planned to do. I was cutting them off completely. I was done. David didn't say I told you so, though he would have been justified. Instead, he asked me what I needed. It was the same question he always asked, and suddenly I knew the answer. I needed to heal. I needed to build a life that was mine. I needed to stop setting myself on fire to keep other people warm. I needed him. He held me and told me he was proud of me, and I realized those were words I had been waiting my entire life to hear from my family. But they were never going to say them, so I had to find people who would. Is there someone in your life who makes you feel like you're never enough no matter how much you give? Have you ever drained your bank account for family members who take you for granted? Drop a comment below and share your story. You might help someone else feel less alone. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but necessary truths. Remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival.